At the time I'm writing this, we're drawing into the close of the first year of Donald Trump's second presidential term. Sigh. Elected Republicans have decided to mostly roll over for his every desire and worst instinct. In the spirit of kindness towards my country and a hope that we can stop our current backslide and surge of populist rage that defines the Trump era, I aim to talk about many of the Republicans up for re-election come November 2026. Hopefully, as many of them as possible lose. Our country deserves better than the modern day GOP. The world deserves better. Our first profile in dishonor is South Carolina's Lindsey Graham. Before we get into it, I will say that I will not be entertaining rumors about Graham's sexuality or discussing the Lady G allegations. I find the conversations about that often function as an excuse for both ostensible liberals and conservatives alike to find celebration for homophobic jokes and remarks. That is not my bag. I will not defend such comments. I thought Katya using the F slur against Graham was an inexcusable weaponization of homophobia and not an example of actual reclamation. I wish people would learn the difference. Homophobia is not a neutral tool that becomes good or bad depending upon who is using it against whom. This will also not be comprehensive. For instance, it does not generally go into Graham's temperament, his penchant for angry performance and childish fits of insults, something that has defined the Trump era of politics and will forever be seen as a stain on the maturity and dignity of our great nation. This is not an exploration of every single vote Graham has ever taken in his long career. This is an argument that Graham ought to lose his seat in the Senate. God willing, he will. 1. LGBT rights. We'll make this quick and dirty, the exact kind of gay getting down I do not prefer. Graham voted against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the policy that forced all gay, bi, and pan service members to remain in the closet or else get fired. In his statement against the repeal, Graham claimed letting the members of our armed forces be openly gay would somehow ruin our military preparedness and effectiveness. This is despite all of the historic evidence that men fight best when there is a handsome pass-around platoon bottom that all the lonely tops can get obsessed with. The Equality Act is a piece of legislation that has been introduced in multiple Congresses. It's a piece of civil rights legislation that would prevent anti-LGBT discrimination. Speaking of the Equality Act in 2021, Senator Graham said, "I would talk until I fell over to make sure that the Equality Act doesn't become law." This is because Graham does not believe LGBT Americans should be anything other than second-class citizens. Perhaps such a view of your fellow Americans puts you beneath the dignity of the office. After SCOTUS overturned Roe v. Wade and people voiced concerns that other important rights cases like Obergefell and Loving might eventually be on the chopping block, Graham insisted he believed that both abortion and marriage should be up to the states. Because 1 month after making those comments, Graham introduced a federal 15-week abortion ban because he ultimately does not actually believe it should be up to the states. Given Graham's long and storied history of opposition to gay marriage, including previous support for an anti-gay constitutional amendment, there is no doubt in my mind he would attempt to reintroduce the Defense of Marriage Act, barring the recognition of gay marriages by the federal government. If SCOTUS ever did, God forbid, overturn Obergefell. 2. Presidential powers. In September 2025, the Trump administration carried out an illegal strike on a boat they claimed was carrying drugs and cartel members. They then took to social media to share footage of this out of the belief that nothing energizes the American people quite like the sadistic glee of posting a snuff film. Senator Graham told Trump early in his second term's first year that he should blow something up. After they blew up a boat and posted a snuff film, Graham said, "Whether it's a lab, I don't care if it's in Mexico, I don't care where it is." Under what possible pretenses would the president have the legal authority to attack Mexico? I don't know, and it doesn't seem as if Graham cares if there is one. Perhaps this is because he shares the administration's disregard for the very concept of war crimes, something hinted at by his voting for the confirmation of Pete Hegseth. We'll get to it. Or perhaps he, like many members of the Senate from both parties over the past few decades, is a coward who does not want to retain the powers of Congress, afraid of being blamed for when a president overuses force or gets our troops injured. According to Graham, it is fine for the president to drone strike people with no trial. It is fine for the president to act as judge, jury, and executioner. This is, of course, an insult to the very ideas of justice and liberal democracy. Likewise, when Trump bombed Iran in June of 2025, Graham was quick to defend Trump and what Graham sees as the president's ultimate power over the armed forces without strict need for congressional approval. In fact, he said, if you don't like what the president does in terms of war, you cut off the funding. Now, despite Congress's complete cowardice post-World War II and acquiescence of their powers to the executive branch, Graham is incorrect. Or at least the implication of his comment is incorrect, as it makes it seem as if the president has the power to do whatever he wants when it comes to war. However, only Congress has the power to declare war. That is the Constitution. Graham does not like that, in my opinion, because he believes the president, at least when it's one of Graham's allies, should have ultimate authority. We are a country founded in rejection of kings. It seems as if that offends the senator's sensibilities. Trump started his second administration by breaking the law and firing 18 inspectors general without the mandated report to Congress. A president is required by law to make 30 days before such firings. When asked about if Trump violated the law that he clearly violated because he does not care about the rule of law in the United States, as he is a populist who believes there should be no guardrails on his quest for control, Graham said, well, technically, yeah, but he has the authority to do it. Graham made it clear he wouldn't lose any sleep over this. As far as the senator is concerned, presidents have the authority to flaunt American law. Not only do they have the ability to do this, but it also doesn't matter. It's totally fine if a United States president openly does not care about his legal duties. It is fine if he has no respect for Congress. Graham does not want a president, he wants a king. That is, to say the least, unbecoming. Of course, Graham only believes the American president should have certain powers when his party is the one that is in charge. For instance, he opposed hearing the nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court because the election season for 2016 had already begun, and supposedly, in his mind, the election should get to decide who would get to fill that vacancy. Of course, when his party was in charge and the exact same thing happened in regards to 2020 and Amy Coney Barrett's nomination, he immediately flipped the script. This is because Graham has no principles except party over country every single time. 3. Free speech. After the assassination of political hate-monger Charlie Kirk, whose Turning Point USA was a sponsor of the Extremist Project 2025, an assassination I wholeheartedly condemn, by the way, because I believe all cruelty is wrong, even against people I find repugnant. Public universities across the country began firing professors who critiqued Kirk. This includes Clemson University, a public university in Graham, South Carolina. Graham said on Twitter, I want to continue to emphasize free speech does not allow an individual to do reputational harm to their employer. Clemson University has thus far made the right decision by terminating a staff member who said highly inappropriate things regarding Charlie Kirk's murder. I hope this trend continues. Before that tweet, he retweeted a Clemson statement where the university embarrassingly, incorrectly, claimed that free speech does not apply to speech that undermines the dignity of others. You can find such speech repugnant, but it is clearly covered by the First Amendment, and a university getting such a basic thing so thoroughly incorrect is an embarrassment to the academy and to our country. The same is true of Senator Graham's understanding of the First Amendment. Clemson's firing of these people is most likely, at least according to FIRE and people who actually care about free speech, in my opinion, a violation of the First Amendment. Were Clemson a private university, that would not be the case. However, public universities are extensions of the government. Their employees are government employees. They are thoroughly bound by the First Amendment, even when disgusting, horrible speech occurs. You may not incite violence, you may not harass people, but you certainly may say disgusting things in your capacity as a citizen in regards to matters of political news. Graham has a history of not defending free speech. In 2011, in regards to a man burning the Quran, something Graham theorized might inspire and antagonize U.S. adversaries at the time, he said, "Free speech is a great idea, but we're in a war." For Senator Graham, the rights of the American people go out the window when we're in war, apparently. For Senator Graham, the president has unlimited power when it comes to war outside of funding it if Congress decides not to fund it after the fact, which is backwards, by the way. So then the president can simply decide it is time for war and therefore decide it is time to restrict the rights of free speech. And it seems Senator Graham would simply nod his head, so long as the president who tramples on Americans carries an R by his name on the ballot. That is an affront to American ideals. It is a disgrace to freedom and democracy. Graham would like to repeal Section 230, something which would destroy content moderation, something conservatives seem to despise due to the whole don't call people slurs thing rather than the let's sanitize every section of the internet to make it for babies thing. Yet doing so would also, an article in TechDirt argues, give presidential administrations more control over online speech and its restrictions. Incentive to bow to government pressure would increase. The threat of costly lawsuits to defend speech and content would potentially lead to overcompliance and heavy self-censorship, as well as the deaths of many smaller online businesses and communities. On that same note, Graham introduced the Earn It Act, one of those ever-present bipartisan attempts at destroying free speech on the internet. Why is Congress, on both sides of the aisle, obsessed with the idea of killing online speech? Who fucking knows? The Electronic Frontier Foundation issued stark warnings on the bill and the chilling effects it would have on both speech and privacy across the internet. Graham's history of this is rather long. He did the same with his Online Content Policy Modernization Act of 2020. The EFF once again had to explain how this would violate free speech protections. Graham, like the majority of his colleagues at the time, voted for FOSTA SESTA. While the goal of the bills was supposedly to help prosecute and crack down on sex trafficking, an admirable goal, its primary effect has been censorship. The law has been counterproductive at best and deadly at worst, said the Nation. Instead, they claim it resulted mostly in a crackdown on legal NSFW content. That is the consistent reporting about the law, as I talk about it in more detail in my first censorship essay. Graham also seemed to approve of one of the previous versions of COSA, though as of time of writing, he hasn't co-sponsored the 2025 edition. Do you know what both versions of COSA have in common? That's right, they represent bipartisan unconstitutional attacks on free speech. Unfortunately, it seems many of our federal politicians don't particularly care about speech. That is depressing overall. Graham, however, holds a particular lack of care for the freedom of speech, and that ought to be disqualifying. 4. Miscellaneous votes. Senator Graham voted yes to confirm Pam Bondi for Trump's Attorney General, despite Bondi's peddling in the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen, showcasing that she doesn't believe in American democracy nearly as much as she believes in kissing Donald Trump's orange ass, or Bondi's pre-nomination comments in support of using the Department of Justice to go after Donald Trump's enemies, abusing the powers of the federal government for petty revenge. He voted to confirm the dishonorable Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, not Secretary of War. Despite Hegseth being beneath the dignity of the office, his history of racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia, his allegations of assault, as well as the college rag he was in charge of, having published underneath him a "Hey, it's not technically rape if they're asleep" article, his history of alcohol abuse, his willingness to blatantly lie, and his defense of war criminals, including a man who allegedly threatened the lives of his fellow servicemen if they ratted out that war criminals' supposed war crimes. I have an essay going over Hegseth in more detail. Needless to say, I believe voting for his confirmation is itself a dishonorable act that should end anyone's political career. There must be conservatives out there who are qualified for the job, who also rise to the dignity of the position. There are honorable Republicans. That Senate Republicans, including Graham, decided to disgrace our country with Hegseth instead isn't merely a betrayal of our country or our troops. It is an insult to both the American people and to conservatives at large. Graham voted to confirm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services, despite RFK's anti-science conspiracies about fluoridization, baseless claims that Prozac causes school shootings, unending lies and conspiracism about vaccines, insistence despite all evidence that vaccines cause autism, and dehumanizing rhetoric comparing rising autism diagnoses to the Holocaust, because apparently autistic children are the equivalent of systematic murder, and RFK seemingly would prefer dead children over autistic children. RFK Jr. is a flat out embarrassment. That he was nominated is a deep, deep stain on our country. That he was confirmed will be a historic shame. Graham's vote to confirm him was another move that, by itself, ought to end his political career. I have another essay going over RFK Jr.'s horrid views. It's no shock that Graham also voted to confirm Kristi Noem to be the Secretary of Homeland Security, despite Noem's history of abusing the power of her political offices for her own personal gain. She is the epitome of the corrupt swamp Trump supposedly wanted to drain, but populism doesn't actually ever care about elites abusing their power, because elite is just defined as political enemies with a platform. I do not think someone who has shown a willingness to use her power to bend the laws for her family's gain is a person who should be granted power. And yes, I have a video going over her as well. I have 2 rather long videos discussing Project 2025 and the Mandate for Leadership, a project by the conservative hate group the Heritage Foundation. One of the main architects of the extremist effort was Russell Vought. Surprise, surprise, Lindsey Graham voted to confirm him to be the director of the Office of Management and Budget. If you note this, you might not be all that surprised to learn his campaign website proudly announces he was endorsed by Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, one of the many conservative groups who sponsored Project 2025. Again and again and again, Graham votes to confirm people who are beneath the dignity of the United States. Perhaps this is because he himself has fallen beneath the dignity of his office and the awesome responsibility he owes to the people of South Carolina. Once upon a time, perhaps, Lindsey Graham had some honor. Now, he doesn't even have a gram of it. Howdy, and thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share if you're feeling saucy. You can join me over on Patreon if you would like, wherein you'll get these videos and others early. You'll also get to have some fun behind the scenes access to some of my art projects, some more personal vlogging style content, and you'll just get to support me and we'll get to chat about art a whole bunch, which is what I love to do most. You can go over to Amazon Smashwords or wherever you get your ebooks and purchase a copy of my poetry collections, Butterfly Snuff, and A Museum of Art and Eggs, both of which are also available in paperback and hardback. I have a second channel where I'm just reading through a bunch of public domain stuff for the fun of it and through my own work, so you'll get readings of these poetry collections and some short stories and some longer form fiction when I get around to it, and some plays. And I have a third channel where I'm uploading my music and art instead of having it all clog up this channel. So go support those if you feel like it. That content, a lot of it will also be getting uploaded early to Patreon. So if you want all of my stuff in one convenient space, Patreon is the place to go, which would be really cool of you, you know? I hope you have a fantastic day. Do not be rude in the comments. Do not go and harass anybody. And I will see you next time.